Hello and welcome to the Reiki Women podcasts. I'm Bronwen Logan and I'm from Reiki with Bronwen, and I have my two lovely colleagues here with me. We have Michaela Daystar. Hi, Michaela, from Heartscapes Reiki, and beautiful Carrie Varela, and she is from the Reiki Healing Society. So if you need any information about any of us, you can find it in the blurb below. Now, today we're going to be talking about our past and how does your past affect you? And do you have ways of working with that? Within the system of Reiki, I would say we do have ways of working with that. And probably, we can take that from a sort of Reiki perspective and build it out as we go along today. So I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about working with the past and how you might do that. And I think we're going to begin with Carrie. Hey, Carrie.
Hi, what a wonderful topic. I think a really poignant one, working with the past. So, I think when I was young, I made a commitment to myself to try to live my life without regrets. And as I've entered my 40s now, I realize how hard that really is because we make so many mistakes in life, right? And we have regrets, and we make choices, some of them good choices, some of them not so good. But they take us to where we are today, right? And I always love to start with, working with the past by really celebrating where I am today, trying to ground more fully into the present moment, which of course is one of the guidelines that the precepts gives to us, and it's not just in Reiki and yoga as well. There's the first line of the Yoga Sutras, the like foundation text of yoga is yoga atta yoga natanam, which means now is the practice of yoga. And so when we're really, really trying to work on healing with any core issue in our life, we really have to start from the now. Because otherwise, these layers of regrets or traumas or, things that we've had to deal with, even if we didn't want to deal with them, or have handed to us, even if we didn't want to have handed to us, they like sit on top of us like layers. And so it's hard to get to the core issue if we're stuck in the past. But anyways, I've been working with this a little bit more because I know for myself, that some of the choices that I made when I was younger, I didn't really consider the long-term effects. And so now actually I'm like living some of those long-term effects of choices that I made when I was younger. And some of the choices weren't the greatest decisions. And led to some repercussions in my life that I've had to deal with now, and it's actually been like a 4-year process for me. Like ever since the pandemic hit, it really brought up some of these past regrets and choices in my life that had these ripple of consequences that take me into where I am today. It's really hard because there's a part of me, maybe my more egotistical part of me, that assumes had I made that right choice back in the day, I would still actually be in the same place I am right now, and have all the things that I have now, and enjoy all the things that I enjoy now. But that's really not true, right? I mean, there's so many different paths we can take in life, and so I have to celebrate that, life is kind of this mixed bag. It's like this good and bad. And that where I am today is exactly where I'm meant to be because I made these choices. And a big part, I think, of healing is taking that personal responsibility for our choices. And not neglecting the work of, honoring the shadow, but also honoring the light. And in that personal decision or that kind of life choice I made when I was even just a young kid, I also inside of that made this choice to follow my heart and make that as a lifetime commitment. And I feel like I've really done that. And that when I'm really deep down in the midst of trying to make a decision, it's like the heart that kind of gives me that sway, yes or no, on whether or not to make a certain choice or not. So I get that like letting go of the past is actually a complicated, nuanced work. And it is work. I've been doing this work lately with a Vedic, so it's learning more about Vedic astrology, which is a very ancient form of astrology. And there's this whole mysticism around the north and south node in astrology, and the north node being the things that you're moving away from, the south node being the things that you are have already processed and been in your past. And in Vedic astrology, it's not really called that. It's called Ketu and Rahu. But nevertheless, we've been talking about how it is actually work. It's actually work to let go of the things that don't serve you. Because for a lot of us, we choose to make choices in our life, and we choose to make them based on really good grounds, like whether it be our past traumas, like again, contracts that maybe we've made for ourselves in our life earlier in our life. And so to choose differently, to choose wisely, to make new choices, fresh new choices, takes actually a lot of inner work. It's not just easy, and it takes work to let go of the past. But one of the beautiful things about Reiki is that it does so much of the work for us. And I don't know how many times I've sat in my own practice with Reiki and had that realization, knowing that I'm holding on too much of the past, and I'm evaluating my choices based on lots of different things that have already happened that really have nothing to do with today. So if I can give myself a fresh, clean start, ground myself fully in the moment I am right now, I leave so much more headspace, so much more creativity to analyze my best choice moving forward. And so I can literally sometimes feel the weight of the past that I've been holding on to, so subliminally, subconsciously, and the Reiki helps me process and move through that, and gives me that fresh start, a reminder to start fresh every day. And I don't know anything else out there that does that for us, almost automatically. But Reiki does do that for us. It gives that spiritual boost, to help us let go of things that we don't even know we're holding on to, but nevertheless are there. And so I'm super grateful for this practice. I don't know where I'd be without it.
I would imagine that's a sentiment we all share to some degree. Man, this is one of these topics that's so wide open. Like my mind goes in so many different directions on how to even interpret the question or the invitation in this conversation. But I think the thing that all of these different threads that came up for me have in common is that for me, when I think about working with the past and the value that the system of Reiki brings to us in terms of working with the past, however that looks, the concept of integration is what it all pivots around. Because if we think about like different perspectives that came up for me, right? If we think about the past, we can think about ancestors. We can think about, the relationship that we have with our own lineage, with our human lineage, the epigenetics of the kind of physio-emotional impact of whatever our ancestors have been through that passes down the line that we carry some piece of, and, what that means to our life. If we think about in the discrete time period of our own life, there's the simple fact that we change throughout our life, right? And that who I was in the past at different points in the past might be a very different person in some ways than who I am now. And there's times when that can feel dissonant. There's times when that can feel uncomfortable, right? There's times when it can feel joyful and it can feel like an amazing thing that, here I was in these particular ways in the past that have certain limitations, and here I am now having overcome some of those limitations, more settled in who I am in certain ways and unsettled in who I am in other ways, right? So that relationship with ourself over time is another way that we can work with the past, or another way that came to my mind as far as the importance of looking at the past. And then the other big one is the way in which we work with trauma. You mentioned that, Carrie, and trauma being a particular form of memory of the past that is in response to particularly painful, frightening, fearful, threatening situations, big or small, that left some sort of imprint on our biology, that left some imprint in our body, in our heart, in our mind, that shifted the way that our automatic responses to stress happen in our body, and therefore, have impacts, have shifts on our thinking, our mindset, our feelings, our emotions, our beliefs, the way that we respond to frightening, challenging situations in the present. And, in extreme situations can really hijack kind of who and what we are in the moment, in the present, based on something that happened in the past. And, many of us experience some form of that, on a spectrum. And it's something that oftentimes there's a lot of curiosity about in terms of working with the system of Reiki around those things. And, as I've shared before, I've done some work around supporting practitioners and how to hold space for the possibility of there being trauma from the past present in a Reiki session. But with all of those examples, all three of those examples, for me, the heart of it and where it intersects with Reiki is in the experience of integration. How well do we, or do we not integrate, bring together into a single whole our experiences of the past, our experiences of our ancestry, our experiences of ourself as a changing person, our traumatic experiences, all of these things that have impacts on our physiology, our DNA, even we talk about epigenetics, our emotions, our thoughts, our mindsets, our beliefs, our self-opinion, how we regard ourselves. And many of us have some form of disintegration that we've experienced at various points in our life. Meaning there's some piece of that past experience that hasn't settled into who we are right now. It's like a thorn that snags on things as we're moving through our life, is a metaphoric way that just occurred to me. And so the system of Reiki really is a vehicle for integration. It gives us practices, mindsets, processes, ways of thinking about the world, ways of interpreting our experiences that help to bring together the experiences of our body, of our mind, of our energy, of our emotions, to align those things together so that they're working together in the present moment. Because whatever we're bringing forward from the past, we're working with it right now. We're working with it in the present. There's a lot of belief systems and ways, perspectives on this that would say that we can go back to the past in various forms and work on it there. That's not a world that I'm inside of. So for me, the reality it is, if I'm going to work on integrating anything from my past, that work is getting done right now in the present. And the system of Reiki gives us this container, this space that can hold back change. It doesn't hold back change. It creates a container within which the change is supported and our system can do what we need to do with that change. I really enjoyed thinking about the example of the relationship we have with ourself over the many versions of ourself that have existed. And that, there can be a lot of sweetness to reflecting on that relationship, and there can be a lot of pain in reflecting on that relationship. There can be a lot of disappointment, a lot of regret. You mentioned wanting to live your life without regrets. And now, a couple decades later, gosh, that was hard, right? But each one of those choices that might stimulate in us a feeling of regret, of pain, of disappointment, of joy, of astonishment, of surprise, all of that it added up to who we are right now in this moment. And so just for today, just for this moment, I'm compassionate for all of those parts of me that make up this whole entire integrated person. The precepts themselves, as you said, Carrie, walk us through this roadmap for being with everything that can come up when we are reflecting on the past, when we are noticing the impacts of the past, when we are missing the past, perhaps, right? Wishing we were back in the past, right? Wishing things that were true then are still true now, and perhaps they are not. And so, yeah, I think that's somewhat disorganized initial reflection to this question, and that really, for me, where it starts is in the importance and the necessity for integration. That is how we live a well life with regard to our past. And it is something that the system of Reiki is particularly well suited to support us in. Yeah, I think that's where I'll start.
I know it's hard to get all those ideas into some form, right? I thought of actually the very, very first thing that I thought of was of the hara, because we talk about the hara being our original energy. So if it's our original energy, so that space beneath our belly button, inside the body, and what's meant by original energy is the energy that we're born with, which means it's the energy that actually is given to us, gifted to us by our parents. And their haras, or hara, I guess it is, it's probably not with an S, their hara, would then have been gifted to them by their parents, and so on and so on. So we have this handing down, but it's not the same. It's not exactly the same. I guess it's a bit like DNA. Maybe Carrie knows more about that. I don't know much about DNA, but just that idea of something being handed down, it's then changed and affected by the lives that we lead, and the lives that my parents led, and the lives that their parents led. And did they nurture that hara? Did they build a stronger hara for themselves to pass on to their child? Yeah. And when we talk of things like trauma and those types of experiences that might be the sort of the shadow aspect of our existence, they too are passed down along with the strength. So we can take it in this moment as it being our responsibility to heal ourselves for the future, but also for the past. And we, by doing that, we are creating something which is, we are, I don't know, supporting, or we are gifting back possibly to our ancestors, those people who gave us this. We're using what they've given us and done the best that we possibly can with that to make ourselves, to do something that is going to possibly change the world in our own little way. Yeah. And so I think, all of us, just anyone listening to this, is doing something for themselves. And that is a really special thing, that we make that change. If we look at the system from its, Japanese perspective, it's very much in line with, obviously, the Reiki precepts, because they come from Japan originally. So, you've both spoken about, for today only, being in this moment, and that total integration, Michaela, that you were talking about. feeling that total interconnectedness. The interconnectedness isn't ruled by time or physicality. So once again, if we're thinking, back to that idea of the hara being something that is gifted to us, it's something that has always existed. And this is just my opportunity right now to do something with that. But it exists in the greater sense of time and the world, and has always existed. So because we're all probably to some degree related. Is there some sort of scientific thing with that? I'm not sure, but we all go back, and there's this interconnection, just even through the generational, aspect of who we are. But it did bring me as well to, there is a term called Musubi, and it is a Japanese term, and it's about birth and becoming. And it's totally about interconnectedness and being here right now, and all the things that have happened to us, giving us a greater sense of who we are and who our history was. So we are the result of our history. And so that interconnectedness definitely historically exists, because if it didn't exist, we wouldn't exist, right? So that being part of a birth and becoming, we're always becoming. And as I said, that moves into the future as well. So it also reminded me of another Japanese aspect, which I really love. And you might know this one. You know the one where, what's it called? It's called Kintsugi, but it's where you have like the pot and you break the pot and you, and like with gold, you'll heal the pot. Yeah. These, it's also called, Kintsugi is also called the art of scars, of precious scars, the art of precious scars. And we are made up of our scars. So it's like you were saying, Carrie, that, the shadow and the light, and we are both. And if we embrace the shadow, the scars, then we are learning from our mistakes and our flaws, and they create us as these precious, unique beings that we are. And I can look at scars on my body. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, I've got a scar on my body where I accidentally hurt myself with scissors. And I was so upset at the time of what was going on in my life that I refused to do anything about it. And it probably needed stitches, I think. But I was just being stubborn, and I ended up with this scar, and it always reminds me of that time in my life. But that's always giving me the opportunity to heal that moment in my life and feel better about that moment in my life, and think about where I am now, and shifts and changes. And then I was thinking about you two, and you guys have tattoos, right? And I don't have, but the idea in our society, in our world today, but I know in a lot of cultures it's a very ancient art, this art of precious scars, of actually scarring ourselves to teach ourselves things, to learn from things. And it's just, I don't know, it's a really instead of us having to hide our scars, we put our scars out there for the world. And so it's our history, what we've been through, and it's there for us to see, to remind us, and also for the world to see, and to show that this is a part of me, this is who I am. And I'm like, these are my bits of gold that I've woven and created to make me who I am today. And I think that's quite a beautiful thing. We're also precious and unique, and it comes from our past.
I love so much of what you guys have been saying, but I love the word integration, Michaela, because I feel like it really speaks to the truth, is that, as much as we can try, I tried one time, I got a divorce, and I tried, and I felt like I was cutting off my arm to get out of that relationship, and it was like an emotional, spiritual scar. And for years, it felt like I was walking around without an arm. And and that I had, and I realized in that I had cut off a part of myself, um, you know, with my own self-limiting beliefs, my own traumas, my own scars, those kinds of things, is but that I could never change the past, and that sounds so simple, but our mind doesn't sometimes compute that. And it was really when I started studying traditional Reiki and started considering thinking about Reiki and healing as wholeness. I really did have to come back into that moment in my life and bring that part of me that I was so uncomfortable with and wanted to leave behind so fully. Like, I had to integrate her back into my life. And that brought up an immense amount of emotion, and some healing for me to do. And because I think, subliminally, for whatever reason, up until that point, I kind of thought of healing as just continuing to better myself, and I could hide away all these parts of myself that I didn't like, or choices that I made that I had regrets about. And integration feels like a really wonderful word, because you can't do that, right? And that when we're in a moment of trauma, or we have regrets from our past. I have a lot of trauma from my childhood as well. Is To me, the work is really working through the emotional imprint that particular problem in my life created for me, and the emotions that I felt about it, the emotions that maybe came to me subliminally or subconsciously, or that I absorbed subliminally or consciously, or the story that I created around that. Um, and those are the things that kind of shed away, in my experience with healing with Reiki, is that those emotional imprints, they start to loosen, and you start to see more compassionately back into those moments, and begin to be able to integrate that part of you more fully into who we are today. And Michaela, I also love that, that whole notion of spaciousness, and it kind of goes into what Bronwen was saying, is that I know for myself, periods of my own self-growth and self-discovery, that, like, I had to shatter the container I was holding myself in, that I had grown too big for it, or it just didn't serve me any longer. And so a lot of times my spiritual growth, it was moments of shattering. Like, I think of, moving from Colorado to California, and I had lived in Colorado my whole life, and then and had 10 years under my belt or something like that as a yoga teacher and a Reiki practitioner. And yeah, I needed to move, and I needed to follow my heart to where I live right now. And in that process, it felt like this shattering, of this container that I had previously held myself in. And actually, while I was about to leave, I remember I had this really beautiful vision of, like a dandelion seed, when the dandelion is like fully sprouted, and it's just all seeds. And it was just like blowing those seeds away. And that was some of the release and letting go, of that experience, that I had planted all these seeds, with my clients and with students, and just living my lifestyle as I did for 10 years as a practitioner. And that I had to let all of that go, like, I couldn't rely on it in the future. And that referrals and all of that have been a very regular part of my livelihood at that point in time. So that whole notion of shattering, but yet coming still back together, right? And integrating. And I think that's what Bronwen is talking about, is like, you can't just keep shattering over and over again. Like, you have to bring this back together. You have to, and in creating that sense of container is what holds all of that. And without that, there is no integrity, there is no integration. It's just like this kind of flowing, moving thing. And if we look at it through this lens, I think it's like our life is really ultimately, the container that holds all those different evolutions of ourselves.
Mm.
And you mentioned tattooing, and I can tell you each and every one of my tattoos was deeply emotionally cathartic. And every time I look at a tattoo, it also reminds me exactly of the choices I made in those moments. It reminds me of that transformation. So like, particularly like my Reiki tattoo, when every time I look at it, like I knew that once I had this tattoo, there was like, I couldn't go back to that person I was before. And so every time I see that, I can feel and experience, re-witness that transformation that happened for me. And it works really well, actually, because a lot of times Reiki is pouring out of my tattoo. Other people Reiki. So, anyways, thanks for that. It was really beautiful.
Oh my gosh, there's so much in here that's just popping for me. I'm going to try to like weave these threads. Yeah, the art of precious scars
Mm.
as the art of integration, right? I have a new favorite word that I learned this week from a book that was written by a doctor who was seeking kind of innovative new ways of looking at medicine holistically through the lens of sustainable agriculture. So she was interviewing sustainable farmers and applying their methodology to her experiences in medicine. Fascinating stuff. It's exactly the kind of material that I geek out on. And in there, she talks about the term allostasis, which means stability through change. And she says that in medicine, often the goal is seen as homeostasis, being the same, like bringing all of our systems into this a state of sameness, a wholeness of, okayness, neutrality, basically. But that in reality, if we look at all of the systems that make up our body and that make up our health and our wellness, all of those systems are designed to respond and flex and shift and pivot with constant change. That the world, our bodies, the inputs and outputs, that impact our physical health and our mind and our emotions and our spirit are constantly changing. And that allostasis is describing the ability and the way in which each piece of ourself is designed to flex and to change all the time. And that the sum of all of that constant change is the appearance of stillness, of homeostasis, of okayness, right? Of baseline. And this was like, blew my mind. So I was like, this is Reiki, right? It's like we come to be able to be stable within the reality of constant change when we work with the system of Reiki, rather than resisting and being afraid of change, which I think is a very common mindset that many of us experience throughout our life. The perception that things are, the same a lot of the time, and then change is this interruption, when the reality is things are constantly changing. And so when we think about, the way in which our scars reflect that allostasis, that response to change, that then brings us into, okayness, right? That it's representing a healing that has occurred.
Yeah.
And I think that for many of us who intentionally get tattooed, we're recreating that process in a certain sense. This is not true for everybody who gets tattooed. There's lots of reasons to get tattooed, lots of valid reasons to get tattooed. But definitely for me, many of my tattoos are, in a sense, a precious scar. They are reflecting a change that has occurred, and that it's indicating the completion, the integration of that change, and now it's represented in an image. There are a few, though, that getting the tattoo itself was part of the change, that there was this impulse to bring this imagery forward that I didn't understand what it meant, but it was actually a harbinger of change. can go into that story another time, perhaps. It was a very, very, very bizarre experience I had with this tattoo that really cued my attention to a major change in my life that needed to happen. But for the most part, they are, to me, like precious scars. And I think about the prevalence of this idea, right, of kintsugi, the precious scar, in so many different cultures. It's ingrained in us to acknowledge the scarring that occurs in our life, to honor it, to see it as sacred, and to see it as beautiful. I think about in the Indian traditions, the goddess Akilanda Vasheva, who is the never not broken goddess. She's always breaking and she's always putting herself back together. And it's in her brokenness that she is in her power. And I think about the concept of tikkun olam in the Jewish tradition, right? The idea that the world is inherently broken and that there's a crack in everything and it lets the light in. And that part of our work is integrating those cracks, is healing those cracks. It's this archetype that's present in the human consciousness. It shows up in some really beautiful ways. And then just, from I was kind of chuckling the idea of tattoos as scars. I have a pretty significant scar across my belly. It's like the entire, all the way across my belly, from a surgery when I was 14, pretty major abdominal surgery. And I remember kind of coming out of that surgery and like in the hospital stating like, I am definitely getting a tattoo to cover this ugly scar. As soon as I turn 18, I'm covering this ugly thing up. And in pretty short order, like within weeks or months, I had abandoned that idea and I was in love with my scar. And it took the healing of that trauma, of that surgery and the long illness that had happened before that, to really bring me to that place. But now it's like, it is the representation of that integration of that really painful traumatic experience, into who I am today. There's no way I would cover that up, right? It is its own precious scar. It doesn't need any imagery covering it up. And my mom just recently was like, I thought you were going to cover that with a tattoo. I was like, no, I wouldn't dream of it. Yeah, but again, these are all really interesting physical like representations of this idea that we're talking about of integration. And that while like there's a certain sense of stillness and wholeness, homeostasis, that we may kind of hold up as the image of being healed, that wholeness is going to be made up of constant change. And that as we integrate, those scars form and we're healed, but there's a mark. In the world of literature, there's an axiom that says we should write stories about our scars, not our wounds. Right? We shouldn't write for the public to consume. Right? Journaling, private writing, of course, definitely part of a healing process. But when we write a story to share out, general rule of thumb, we should write it about the places that have been integrated. Right? We should write it about the scars, not the things that are open and painful and bleeding in this moment. Right? Because we don't yet know who we're going to be on the other side of that. Maybe an interesting time to take some notes, right, to look at later, but not to publish for the general public. So anyway, all of those reflections were about things that weren't explicitly Reiki, but like for me, like those are the things that feed my Reiki practice. It's like I understand the value of my Reiki practice through those kinds of metaphors and through those direct experiences. And I love that this metaphor of the precious scar as a form of integration has popped up in this conversation.
I had a student recently, and she said that, I don't really like using the word wholeness. I much prefer the word balance. And, I tend to use them, how do you say that? I just interchange those words sort of, but she's right. And it's for exactly what you were just talking about, because wholeness can sound like a fixed state, where balance is where we're always shifting, moving. It's like seeing, I don't know, some sort of like balls on something, moving, shifting, trying to get their balance, and then they move again, and then they shift again. And that's how I do see us and feel us to be. And that's really, I love that. What was it called? Allostasis? Yeah, pretty amazing.
Allostasis. Mm-hmm.
Very beautiful. Good. Has anyone got any last words they'd like to finish off with, Carrie?
Oh, I just think that, the integration piece for me too is always coming back. We've talked a lot about our integrating and maybe finding some way to process and be with our past selves and bring her with us, on the journey. But I also just love this whole notion of every day we can start something new, and the Reiki path as a practitioner of Reiki for me feels, I'm walking always on a new path. I'm always creating a new path for myself, and yet it doesn't have to be that way. I can just lean into the things that I know really serve me or have worked for me in my Reiki practice, working with clients, teaching Reiki classes, all of those things kind of just basically got completely jumbled up in the air. This is probably many moments of allostasis during COVID. So it's kind of left me with this like latent anxiety about where to go next and what to do next and trying to create something new but what I've really learned is that, if I can ground myself fully in the present moment, I can be more conscious about the choices that I'm making that dictate my future. Right. And hopefully take with me a little bit less of those regrets, be more conscious about what I'm choosing, see more longer term the effects of my choices. And so that's one thing that I've been really sitting with and choosing consciously. So, for example, I have a retreat that I've done for the last couple of years, and I'm kind of gearing up to do it again. And I'm also in the decision of like, I actually don't have to do this if I don't want to. And giving myself that permission, which sometimes it's hard too. I don't know why, but that we don't have to be dictated by what we've done in the past. We can, in any moment, we can choose brand new things. So,
yeah. I think the last piece that I want to say, it's a little bit of a disclaimer to some of what we've shared around the idea of trauma. I was talking with a woman today who took my Cultivating Trauma Informed Reiki Practice class and had requested a follow-up conversation to kind of workshop through a situation she was working with a client who, had come to her as a form of releasing trauma that she was experiencing. And there was some kind of intense things that were happening in their sessions that she wanted to workshop. And so the piece that I want to share is that, Reiki and many other embodiment-based practices that can help to integrate our physical experience with our mind, with our emotional experience, with our energy, is an incredibly important part of healing from specific traumatic experiences and the way in which that gets stuck in our body. We understand much more now that trauma is physiological, that talk therapy can get us quite a bit of understanding and quite a bit of shifting in our understanding of what had happened and our processing of what happened. But there's a piece that really, for many of us, needs to be worked out through the body and really through the integration of our body, our thoughts and memories, and our feelings about all of it. So Reiki can absolutely be part of that process. The disclaimer is that Reiki in and of itself is not trauma treatment. And that, I run into people often who are inclined towards holistic ways of dealing with medical and psychological challenges, which I generally support. And there are things that are outside of our wheelhouse, that are outside of our skill set, outside of our training, and that we shouldn't take on, or we shouldn't ask a Reiki practitioner to take on unless we have additional support. And so I just wanted to mention that in this particular case with the woman I was working with, her client was in therapy, was working with a trauma support person, and was using the Reiki sessions as an embodiment-based practice to support the work she was doing in therapy. So it actually was all a really good situation. We, worked through some ways in which she as a practitioner could feel, supported in supporting her client. So it was a really good situation, it turned out. But I just wanted to make that clear because, we can feel tempted because we know how powerful Reiki is at integration, at release, at, coming to a feeling of calm and wholeness and all of these things, balance. I liked that distinction that you made there, Bronwen. To kind of to bite off more than we can chew in terms of if we are working with someone or we are someone who really has a very not integrated traumatic experience that they're trying to heal, that does require a community of support beyond a Reiki practitioner. So I just wanted to put that asterisk on that part of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And I think we're at the end, everyone. So we'll take our past with us into the present and future. And please click. Someone was telling me the other day, if you tick on that little bell thing on YouTube, then you get notifications when our new podcasts come in. So do that. And of course, follow us. That'll also help with that. And I think is that all the bits and pieces? I think so. Thank you so much for sharing today. And we look forward to seeing you next week with the next topic. Whatever that is. Bye for now.